So which of your men will this baby belong to, sweetheart? My stomach tightened so fast I swear the air left my lungs in one clean pull. The chandelier above the dining table threw a harsh, white circle of light onto the plates, like a spotlight that didn't ask permission. We were sitting in my fiancé's childhood dining room, the same heavy oak table I'd been told had held every birthday cake and every family argument for decades. The house smelled like roasted chicken and lemon cleaner, that sharp, "company is coming" scent. Voices overlapped, his sisters chatting about baby clothes, someone's friend laughing too loudly, forks clicking against ceramic. It was normal until it wasn't. My fiancé sat beside me with his hand resting over mine, warm and steady, like he could keep me anchored just by contact. I was 5 months pregnant, and lately my body felt like it belonged to 2 different timelines at once. One where I was glowing and safe, and another where I was always bracing for someone to remind me I didn't deserve either. His father leaned back in his chair like he was settling in to watch a show. He was a broad man with a flushed face from beer and a habit of turning every conversation into a stage. He'd been talking about family traits, showing off stories like trophies, who had the same ears, who got the same laugh, who inherited the same stubbornness. Then he slid into it, casual as a knife hidden in a napkin. He said there was a birthmark the men in their family carried high on the inner thigh. He spoke about it with that crude pride some older men mistake for charm. He pointed his thumb at himself, then at my fiancé, then toward his brothers on the other side of the table, all of them already smiling before the joke landed. "And our grandkids have it too," he added, nodding at one of the little ones running around the living room. "So your baby might have it." I saw my fiancé's jaw tighten. It happened before he even spoke, like his body recognized danger faster than his mind could cushion it. His father's eyes flicked to me, measuring. He knew exactly how to aim. Then came the line, that sick little grin, the word sweetheart delivered like he owned it. In that moment, I didn't think about the chicken cooling on the serving platter or the baby name conversation that had been floating around the room. I thought about the first time I'd been found out years ago, how an accusation can turn a room into a court without a judge. I thought about how quickly people decide what you are and how hard they work to keep you there. 2 years back, someone in this family had dug up my past and dropped it on the table like a rotten gift. I told the truth because I refused to live inside a lie. My fiancé hadn't flinched then. He looked at me like I was still me, like my survival didn't disgust him. But the rest of them had taken the information and stored it away like ammunition. There had been months of strange vigilance after that. Women watching their husbands when I walked into the room, as if I carried temptation in my purse. My fiancé shut it down hard. He'd drawn lines. He'd made it clear that if they wanted him in their lives, they didn't get to treat me like a stain. I believed it had passed. I let myself believe it. Now I understood something. They hadn't forgiven anything. They'd just learned to smile while they waited for a better moment. My fiancé pushed his chair back a fraction, the wood scraping the floor. He was about to speak, his shoulders already lifting with that familiar protective anger. But I didn't let him. Not because I didn't need defending, because I was tired of being defended like I was on trial. I turned my face toward my father-in-law and kept my voice steady. "I don't get it." The laughter hit a snag. It didn't stop completely, but it stuttered, confused at first, as if the script had been interrupted. His brothers exchanged looks. Someone's friend paused mid-sip with a glass halfway to his mouth. My father-in-law blinked, still smiling. "Yeah, because it runs in the family," he said, like that explained everything. I nodded slowly, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make the room listen. "I still don't get it," I said. "Why would my baby get it from you?" A flush crawled up his neck. He gave a small chuckle that sounded thinner than before, a laugh trying to pretend it wasn't suddenly exposed. "Oh, come on," he said, "it's just a joke." I kept my eyes on him. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I didn't call him anything. I didn't give him the satisfaction of a scene that would let him tell himself I was crazy or too sensitive. "I don't understand it," I said again, and my tone didn't change. You all laughed. Explain it to me. His smile twitched, the corners of his mouth tightening like a lid being forced shut. He glanced around the table as if looking for backup, but the room had shifted. People weren't laughing now. They were watching him. That was the thing about quiet questions. They leave no place for a punchline to hide. One of his friends, an older man with a golf tan and polite eyes, cleared his throat. Honestly, he muttered, not quite under his breath, that's not funny. My father-in-law's brother gave a short, uncomfortable cough. Another looked down at his plate, suddenly very interested in his mashed potatoes. The women at the table stiffened, their hands going still around napkins and cups. My fiancé didn't move, but I felt the heat coming off him, a contained fury that would have erupted if I'd given him a reason. My father-in-law tried again, softer this time, like he could soothe the room back into agreement. You know what I meant, he said, and his tone carried something sharp underneath, a warning disguised as humor. Given, you know? The word hung there without being said. Past, history, what they thought I was, what they wanted to keep me as. I smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile you use when you refuse to bleed in public. No, I said. I really don't. Explain it. He stared at me for a second too long, his eyes narrowing. And then he did something small that told me everything. He looked away first. He pushed his chair back hard enough that it bumped the wall behind him. I'm not doing this, he snapped, as if I'd attacked him instead of asking him to repeat his own words. He stood, tossed his napkin on the table, and walked out of the room with stiff shoulders, like a man offended by consequences. The silence he left behind was heavy and bright under that overhead light. Someone shifted in their seat. A fork clinked against a plate. A child laughed in the other room, oblivious, and the sound felt almost cruel in its innocence. My fiancé turned toward me, his eyes wide. Anger, pride, worry, all braided together. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, his brother-in-law leaned forward from across the table, face tight with righteousness. You embarrassed him in his own house, he said, voice low and hard like he was delivering a verdict, and you knew exactly what that joke meant. I felt my fiancé's hand squeeze mine under the table, and I watched the brother-in-law's eyes slide down to my stomach like my pregnancy was evidence for or against me. Then he added, cold as a closed door, You should apologize, before this family decides you don't belong here at all. The room didn't recover after he said it. It tried, the way rooms always do when people are desperate to pretend nothing important just happened, but the effort showed. Someone reached for a serving spoon that no longer mattered. A chair scraped back into place with too much care. The overhead light felt harsher now, as if it had been turned a fraction brighter, just to make sure every reaction was visible. My fiancé stood before I could answer. He didn't raise his voice. That was worse. You don't get to talk to her like that, he said, calm and exact. Not here. Not anywhere. His brother-in-law lifted his hands, palms out, the universal sign of innocence that usually arrives after the damage is done. I'm just saying, he replied, leaning back in his chair, this didn't have to turn into a thing. I felt my breath stall halfway in. It was strange how quickly responsibility slid onto me, how easily the burden shifted as if gravity favored it. I watched the way his sisters avoided my eyes, the way their faces arranged themselves into neutral masks that weren't neutral at all. Silence pressed against my ears, thick enough that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. One of his friends cleared his throat again, louder this time, and said my fiancé's name. Maybe everyone just needs to cool off, he suggested, already standing, already halfway out of the room in spirit. He smiled at me, polite and distant, the smile people use when they don't want to be implicated. My fiancé didn't sit back down. He stayed where he was between me and the rest of the table, a physical barrier I hadn't asked for but needed anyway. We're leaving, he said. His mother flinched, finally looking at me directly. Her eyes flicked to my stomach and back to my face. "Let's not be dramatic," she said softly, like drama was something that happened without provocation. "Your father didn't mean it like that." I waited. My hands rested on the edge of the table, fingers spread against the cool wood. I could feel the grain beneath my skin, each groove distinct. "Then how did he mean it?" I asked. No one answered. That silence stretched, too long to be accidental. It was the kind of pause that tells you everything about where you stand without anyone needing to say it out loud. I felt a faint tremor run through my wrists and stilled them by curling my fingers inward, nails pressing into my palms. My fiancé pulled my chair back gently. The legs scraped the floor, sharp and final. I stood, my body slower than my thoughts, my balance just a little off these days. His sister reached out as if to hug me, then hesitated and let her arm fall back to her side. That small, aborted gesture landed harder than words. As we walked toward the front door, I heard someone whisper behind us. It wasn't meant for me, but it wasn't hidden either. "This is exactly what I was talking about," a woman murmured, her voice thin with disapproval. Outside, the night air was cold enough to sting my cheeks. The porch light cast a yellow pool over the steps, warm and deceptive. My fiancé stopped once we reached the driveway, turning toward me, his face tight. "I'm so sorry," he said, and this time the anger cracked, letting something raw through. "I should have shut that down sooner." I shook my head, not trusting my voice yet. The car door felt solid under my hand when I opened it, something reliable in a moment that wasn't. We drove away without turning the radio on. Streetlights slid across the windshield in slow, steady intervals, each one briefly illuminating the inside of the car before disappearing behind us. Halfway home, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, jaw tightening again, and handed it to me without a word. It was his brother-in-law. A long message, already sent, already impossible to unsay. He wrote about respect and family loyalty, about how my past made people uncomfortable and how I should be more understanding of jokes, about how embarrassing his father like that was unnecessary, and how an apology would smooth things over before the baby came. I handed the phone back. The glow from the screen lingered in my vision for a second after, like a ghost image. "They think I owe them something," I said quietly. My fiancé exhaled through his nose, a sharp sound. "You don't." At home, the quiet was different, softer. The lamp in the living room cast a low amber light that didn't interrogate. I sank onto the couch, shoes still on, and stared at the wall for a moment longer than necessary. My body felt heavy, like gravity had been adjusted without warning. His phone buzzed again, then again. His mother this time, then one of his aunts. Short messages, all variations on the same theme. Let it go. Be the bigger person. You know how he is. For the sake of peace. Peace apparently required my silence. I watched my fiancé type and delete. Finally, he set the phone face down on the table. "I'm not responding tonight," he said. That was when my own phone vibrated. A message from his sister, the one who'd almost hugged me. "I love you," it began, which immediately made my stomach drop. "But Dad's really hurt. You didn't have to push him like that. Everyone knows what he meant." I stared at the words until they blurred slightly. Everyone knows what he meant. The sentence sat there, smug and complete, as if understanding excused cruelty. I placed my phone beside his, the two screens dark and silent. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay on my side, one hand resting over the curve of my stomach, feeling small movements that reminded me there was more at stake than my pride. My fiancé breathed evenly beside me, but I could tell he wasn't fully asleep either. Every so often his body shifted, tension leaking out in increments. In the morning, sunlight crept through the blinds in thin stripes, pale and hesitant. The world looked normal again, which felt like an insult. Over coffee, his phone lit up repeatedly on the counter, each vibration a small, insistent knock. By noon, the messages had changed tone. Where there had been accusation, there was now disappointment. Where there had been anger, there was wounded dignity. His father hadn't spoken directly to either of us, but his absence was loud. It echoed through every message that referenced him without naming him. "We're all family," one text read. "We need to handle things privately." Another, "Think about the stress you're putting on him at his age." I watched my fiancé read them, his shoulders slowly slumping under a weight he'd carried his whole life. "They're circling," he said finally. That afternoon, his mother called. He put her on speaker, his thumb hovering near the button like he might need to escape. Her voice came through smooth and controlled. She spoke about misunderstanding and tradition, about how men joke and women are sensitive, about how my condition made emotions run high. She never apologized. She never named what had been said. "I just want us all together again," she concluded, "before the baby comes." I waited, counting my breaths. My fiancé answered carefully, promising nothing. When the call ended, the room felt smaller. Later, as evening settled in, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated, then opened the message. It was from one of his father's brothers. Short, direct. "You should have known better than to shame him. Don't forget where you came from." The words sat there, ugly and deliberate, like they'd been polished before being sent. I closed the message without replying, but the chill from it lingered, seeping in slowly, and for the first time since that night, a different thought took shape. One that didn't ask how to make this stop, but what else they were already saying when I wasn't in the room. I was not always someone people whispered about. There was a time when my name meant nothing more than a girl trying to get through the day, before labels hardened around me, before survival became something others mistook for shame. I grew up in a narrow apartment above a laundromat, the kind where the walls never fully held back the noise. Washers rattled late into the night. Dryers hummed like tired insects. The air always carried a damp warmth mixed with detergent, a smell that clung to clothes no matter how often they were cleaned. My mother used to joke that even our dreams probably smelled like soap. Money was always a careful calculation. Rent first, electricity second, food third. Everything else was optional. When something broke, it stayed broken until it became impossible to ignore. We learned early how to live around absence. My mother worked 2 jobs most of my childhood. I learned to read by myself at the kitchen table while she slept on the couch between shifts, her shoes still on, her purse clutched to her chest like it might wander off without her. She called me her quiet miracle because I learned not to need much. At 17, I got accepted into a university far enough away that it felt like escape. The acceptance letter arrived in a thin envelope that shook in my hands. I remember standing by the window, light slanting in just right, dust floating like tiny stars, and thinking this was it. This was the beginning. But hope is expensive. Tuition didn't care about my determination. Rent didn't pause for dreams. Scholarships covered some, not enough. Student loans came with warnings that made my chest tighten. My mother cried when I told her the numbers, her hands twisting the edge of her apron. She offered to help anyway, even though we both knew there was nothing left to give. So I worked, first retail, then late shifts. Cleaning offices downtown, I memorized bus routes and learned how to sleep in fragments. I studied with coffee that tasted burnt and desperation that tasted metallic. It still wasn't enough. I remember the exact night I realized I was cornered. I was sitting on the edge of my bed, textbooks stacked like a wall beside me, eviction notice folded small in my pocket. My phone lay face down on the mattress. It had been buzzing all evening with messages from classmates planning trips, dinners, futures. I stared at my hands and saw how thin my wrists looked under the yellow bulb overhead. When the choice finally came, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt practical, like stepping into cold water when you know it's the only way across. I didn't tell anyone. Hell, I didn't want permission. I didn't want pity. I needed tuition paid. I needed rent covered. I needed to keep going. Those years blurred together in controlled pieces, schedules, boundaries, rules I followed to protect the parts of myself I refused to lose. I learned how to listen without absorbing, how to smile without inviting, how to compartmentalize so thoroughly that survival became almost mechanical. I finished my degree. I walked across that graduation stage with my head high, my gown brushing my ankles, my mother crying in the audience. The auditorium lights were blinding, warm, and overwhelming. I remember thinking that if anyone could see the invisible ledger inside me, every hour, every compromise, they would understand how hard-won that moment was. I left that life behind when I no longer needed it. Quietly, completely. No dramatic exit. Just a closed door and a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. When I met my fiancé, I was already past all of that. Older. Steadier. My hands had stopped shaking when the rent was due. My life fit inside itself again. We met through work, indirectly. A mutual project, conversations that began about logistics and drifted slowly into something else. He listened when I spoke, not in the hungry way some men do, but with attention that felt neutral and safe. When he laughed, it was with his whole face. When he disagreed, he didn't belittle. I didn't tell him everything at first, not because I was hiding, but because I was done leading with wounds. We dated like two adults choosing each other deliberately. Coffee dates, long walks, quiet evenings where nothing needed proving. When the truth came out, forced, sudden, public, it was violent in its exposure. His brother-in-law found out somehow and decided the family deserved to know. The living room that night was bright with too many lamps on at once. Faces arranged in shock, curiosity, judgment. I told the truth without softening it. My fiancé sat beside me still. When I finished, he took my hand and said simply, "I know who you are." That moment mattered more than any apology I never owed. After that, there was a stretch of time where I felt like an object under observation. His mother watched conversations too closely. Aunts laughed too loudly at nothing. Men were suddenly shepherded away when I entered rooms, as if I radiated temptation. It was humiliating in its own quiet way. My fiancé noticed. He confronted it. He told them to stop. Some did. Others learned to disguise it better. Then life moved forward again. Engagement, plans, hope layered carefully back into place. When I found out I was pregnant, the test strip felt warm between my fingers. I sat on the edge of the bathtub, tiles cool beneath my feet, staring at the lines until they blurred. The future rushed toward me all at once, terrifying and miraculous. We told his family early. I wanted transparency. I wanted nothing hidden. His sisters hugged me. His younger brother joked about baby names. His mother pulled me aside, her voice low and trembling as she asked if the child was really her son's. I remember how the hallway light flickered slightly overhead, casting uneven shadows on the wall. I remember the way her eyes searched my face, not for joy, but for confirmation. "Yes," I said, calm, firm. "It is." She smiled after, stiff and rehearsed, and said she was happy to be a grandmother. I let myself believe her. Now, lying in bed days after that dinner, I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me. Its rhythm reminded me of the laundromat machines from childhood, steady, indifferent, always moving. I thought about how far I'd come, how much I'd endured to arrive here, and I understood something with painful clarity. They hadn't forgiven my past. They had simply waited for a moment when it would serve them again. The pressure didn't arrive all at once. It seeped in, thin and persistent, the way cold finds the smallest crack in a window frame and makes itself at home. After that dinner, the family didn't explode. They recalibrated. Invitations still came, but the tone shifted. Times changed at the last minute. Details were forgotten. I would hear about gatherings after they'd already happened, mentioned casually like afterthoughts. When I did show up, conversations bent around me without quite touching. Chairs were rearranged so I wasn't directly part of the circle. Plates were cleared before I was finished eating. It was subtle enough that if I named it, I sounded paranoid. My fiancé noticed pieces of it, but not all. He had grown up swimming in their rhythms. He knew how to breathe there without thinking. I was learning the current the hard way. One afternoon, his mother stopped by unannounced. I was alone, folding tiny baby clothes on the couch, the soft cotton slipping through my fingers like something fragile and undeserved. The light from the window was pale and honest, the kind that shows dust instead of hiding it. She stood in the doorway for a moment too long before stepping in, eyes flicking over the room. "You look tired," she said, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "I am," I replied. Pregnancy had settled into my bones, a constant low ache and a heaviness that made even simple movements deliberate. She sat without being invited and watched me fold. Silence stretched. I waited. Finally, she spoke. "You know," she said carefully, "people are talking." My hands paused mid-fold. About what? She tilted her head, studying me as if deciding how much truth I could handle. About the baby. About stability. There it was. The familiar tightening behind my ribs. "We're fine," I said. "We both work. We're prepared." She nodded slow. "I just worry," she continued. "Given everything you've been through, stress can affect a child." The word everything did a lot of work without saying anything at all. I folded another onesie, smaller than my palm. "I'm healthy," I said. "So is the baby." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Of course. I just hope you're making the best choices now." After she left, the apartment felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't changed. I stood there for a while, the folded clothes stacked neatly beside me, and wondered when concern had started to feel like surveillance. A week later, my fiancé came home quiet. Too quiet. He set his keys down with care and avoided my eyes as he took off his jacket. "What happened?" I asked. He hesitated, then sighed. "My dad called." My stomach dropped. "About?" He rubbed his face. "He thinks things got out of hand at dinner, says he deserves an apology." I waited. The silence between us stretched, thick and uncomfortable. "And?" I asked finally. "And he thinks it would help if you reached out," he said, "just to smooth things over." There it was again, the way responsibility kept finding its way back to me, like a homing instinct. "I didn't do anything wrong," I said quietly. "I know," he replied quickly. "I know you didn't. He's not backing down." That night, his phone buzzed late. Then again. He didn't answer. The glow from the screen lit up the dark bedroom in short pulses, like a warning light. The next morning, a group message appeared. His aunts, his mother, his sisters, all in one place. It began with family platitudes, love, unity, wanting what's best. Then it slid, almost imperceptibly, into expectation. "We all need to be mindful of how things look," one aunt wrote. "Your father was humiliated," another added. "Pregnancy hormones can make misunderstandings worse," his mother chimed in. I read the messages in silence, my thumb hovering uselessly over the screen. No one mentioned what had been said. No one quoted the joke. The event was rewritten in real time, reshaped into something where I was the disruption, not the target. When I didn't respond, the tone sharpened. "We're just trying to help you," a sister messaged privately. "You don't want to start your family with tension," another wrote. Help again felt like a leash. At the next family gathering, I arrived already braced. The house was loud with voices, the overhead lights too bright, casting everything in an unforgiving white. My father-in-law greeted me with a nod, no smile. He didn't look at my stomach. During dinner, he spoke to everyone except me. When I offered to pass a dish, he reached around me instead, stretching awkwardly to take it from someone else. The gesture was small but precise. I felt myself shrink in my chair, shoulders drawing inward. Halfway through the meal, he laughed at something his brother said and added casually, "Some people just don't know when to stop pushing." The table went quiet for a fraction of a second. No one said my name. No one needed to. I focused on my plate. On the way, the gravy pooled against the potatoes. My hands trembled slightly, and I pressed my elbows into my sides to steady them. Later, in the living room, one of his cousins leaned close as if to share a secret. "You should really try to keep the peace," she whispered. "You've already had such a complicated life." The word complicated landed like a verdict. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door. The mirror showed a version of me I barely recognized, eyes too bright, jaw clenched, shoulders tight with held-in words. I ran cold water over my wrists and waited for the pounding in my chest to slow. When I came out, his father was standing alone by the window, backlit by the streetlight outside. He didn't turn when I passed. "Are you satisfied?" he asked quietly. I stopped. "With what?" "With the attention," he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were flat. "You made a spectacle of me." "I asked you to explain a joke," I replied, my voice steady despite the way my pulse jumped. "That's all," he snorted. "You knew exactly what you were doing." The room felt smaller suddenly, the walls inching closer. I could hear laughter from the kitchen, distant and muffled, like it belonged to another world. "I won't apologize for asking not to be disrespected," I said. His mouth curved into something almost like a smile. "Careful," he murmured. "You're not in a position to make demands." That sentence followed me home. It echoed in my head while I washed dishes, while I lay awake at night listening to my fiancé's breathing, while I folded more baby clothes and wondered if I was foolish to think any of this could be simple. The pressure intensified. Invitations came with conditions. If things can be civil, if we're all on the same page. My fiancé started getting calls at work, his father's number lighting up his phone like an accusation. One evening, he came home exhausted, his shoulders slumped. "They're saying I've changed," he told me, "that I'm choosing you over them." I swallowed. "You're allowed to choose your family," I said softly. He looked at me, eyes tired. That's what I thought. A few days later, I received a message from his father directly for the first time. "I expect an apology," it read, "before this goes any further." No greeting, no softness, just expectation. I didn't reply. The next time we saw them, the silence was weaponized. Conversation stopped when I entered rooms. People looked through me, not at me. I felt erased while being scrutinized, a strange double existence that left me disoriented. At one point, his mother commented loudly about how some women used pregnancy as leverage. Laughter followed, sharp and brittle. I felt my breath catch, just for a second too long. That night, lying in bed, I pressed my hand to my stomach and felt a slow, deliberate movement beneath my palm. The fan overhead turned steadily, its shadow slicing the ceiling into repeating patterns. I stared at it and realized, with a clarity that made my chest ache, that this wasn't about a joke anymore. This was about control, and they were closing in. The moment didn't arrive with shouting or slam doors. It came quietly, the way truth often does, slipping in when you're tired enough to stop resisting it. I was alone at home when it happened. Late afternoon light spilled through the window in a thin, slanted line, catching on the edge of the coffee table where my fiancé had left his work bag. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the faint tick of the wall clock, each second announcing itself with unnecessary precision. I had been trying to rest. Pregnancy had turned fatigue into something dense and unavoidable, like carrying a weight I couldn't set down. I lowered myself onto the couch carefully, one hand bracing my back, the other instinctively hovering near my stomach. The baby shifted, a slow roll beneath my skin, and for a brief moment the world narrowed to that sensation alone. Then my phone vibrated. I almost ignored it. Lately, every notification came with a familiar tightening in my chest, an instinctive bracing, but the name on the screen stopped me. My father-in-law. He had never messaged me directly before. Every demand, every criticism had traveled through someone else, cushioned just enough to maintain plausible decency. This felt different, intentional. I stared at the screen for a long second before opening it. The message was short. "We need to talk. You've taken things too far, and it's time you fixed it." No greeting, no acknowledgement of my pregnancy, no question. I felt something inside me go very still. I didn't respond. I set the phone face down on the table and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The fan was off now, the room unmoving. The silence pressed in, heavy but clear. Minutes passed, then another vibration. "You embarrassed me. In front of my family, in my house." Another pause, then a third message. "If you want this family to accept your child, you'll apologize." I sat up slowly. The words on the screen seemed to tilt, like the ground beneath them wasn't level anymore. My hand moved to my stomach without conscious thought, fingers splayed, protective. "Accept your child." There it was, stripped of jokes, stripped of pretense, clean and cruel. I read the messages again, each word settling into place with sharp clarity. There was no misunderstanding here, no generational humor gone wrong, no accidental offense. This was leverage. I heard the front door open then, keys clinking softly, my fiancé stepping inside. He paused when he saw my posture, the phone lying dark on the table between us like a loaded object. "What's wrong?" he asked. I slid the phone toward him without a word. He read in silence. I watched his face change. Confusion, then anger, then something colder. His jaw tightened, a muscle jumping near his temple. "He said that?" he asked quietly. I nodded. He exhaled slowly and sat down across from me, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. The room felt charged now, the air thicker, like before a storm. "This isn't okay," he said. "No," I agreed. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. He looked up at me, eyes searching my face. "I'm calling him." I raised a hand. "Wait." He froze, concern flashing across his features. "What?" "I don't want you to fix this for me," I said. The words came out steadier than I expected. "Not this time." A silence settled between us. He leaned back slightly, studying me, not defensive, just attentive. "I've been reacting," I continued, choosing each word carefully, explaining, enduring, hoping it would pass if I stayed calm enough. I paused, the weight of the realization pressing into my chest. But he's not confused. He's not hurt. He's testing how much he can take. My fiancé's hands tightened together. "You don't owe him anything." "I know," I said. And for the first time since that dinner, I really did. Something had shifted. The fear that had kept me quiet, the fear of being seen as difficult, of confirming their worst assumptions, had burned itself out. In its place was something cooler, clearer. "He thinks my past makes me manageable," I said, "like it disqualifies me from boundaries." My fiancé swallowed. "It doesn't." "I know," I repeated. The baby moved again, a gentle nudge from the inside, grounding me. I placed my palm over the curve of my stomach and felt an unfamiliar steadiness settle there, like a center of gravity locking into place. I picked up my phone. My fiancé watched me, saying nothing. I opened the message thread and typed slowly, deliberately. "I didn't embarrass you," I wrote. "I asked you to explain a comment that questioned my integrity and my child's. I won't apologize for that." I stopped, reread it, then continued. "I will not accept being spoken to with disrespect or threats. If that's a problem, that's yours to sit with." My thumb hovered over the send button. For a brief moment, the old instinct flared, to soften it, to add reassurance, to offer peace in exchange for dignity. I didn't. I pressed send. The message whooshed away, small and final. My fiancé let out a breath he'd been holding. "Are you okay?" he asked. I nodded. "I am." The phone buzzed almost immediately. I didn't look. Whatever was coming next didn't feel like something I needed to brace for anymore. I leaned back into the couch, feeling the firmness of it beneath me, the quiet of the apartment settling into something that felt less like isolation and more like space. Outside, a car passed, tires hissing briefly on pavement. Somewhere down the street, a door closed. Ordinary sounds resumed, indifferent and steady. I looked at my fiancé and saw something in his expression I hadn't noticed before. Not just anger on my behalf, but relief, as if he'd been waiting for me to arrive at this moment too. "I'm done shrinking," I said softly. He nodded once. "Then we're done letting them." The phone vibrated again on the table, insistent. I didn't reach for it, because for the first time since all of this began, I understood exactly where I stood, and more importantly, where I wouldn't stand anymore. I didn't announce what I was doing next. I didn't need to. Once I stopped shrinking, the work began on its own, quiet and methodical, the way survival had taught me long ago. The first thing I did was stop deleting messages. It felt small, almost petty, but it changed the shape of my days. Every text stayed, every voicemail saved, screenshots labeled with dates and names. I created a folder on my laptop and named it Nothing Special, something bland that wouldn't draw attention if anyone glanced at the screen. Inside it, the record grew. His father's words sat there in black and white, stripped of tone and context, unable to hide behind laughter or tradition. The thread about accepting my child looked different when it wasn't wrapped in beer breath and a crowded table. It looked deliberate. My fiancé noticed the shift. He didn't ask questions. He watched me move through the apartment with a new precision, opening mail carefully, flattening envelopes, slipping documents into a file instead of tossing them into a drawer. He brought home a small accordion folder from the office one evening and set it on the counter without comment. "Just in case," he said. I nodded. We stopped answering calls immediately. When his mother rang, he let it go to voicemail. When his sisters texted, responses came hours later, short and factual. No explanations, no apologies. The temperature changed. The family felt it. One afternoon, his aunt showed up at our door without warning. I saw her through the peephole, her hair done carefully, her posture already defensive. I didn't open it. I stood there, heart steady, and listened to her knock twice more before she left. That night, a message arrived from his cousin. "Ignoring us is making things worse." I saved it. I spoke to my doctor at my next appointment, choosing my words carefully. I didn't dramatize. I didn't minimize. I described the stress, the messages, the way certain comments had made my chest tighten and my sleep fracture. She listened, pen still, eyes focused. When I finished, she nodded once. "Stress like that isn't nothing," she said. "If you need documentation later, let me know." I walked out of the clinic with a printed summary of the visit tucked into my bag. The paper felt heavier than it should have. At home, I began writing things down. Not feelings, facts, dates. Who said what, where, and who was present. I didn't embellish. I didn't soften. I let the words stand on their own. The act of it steadied me. Each line was a brick, laid carefully, building something solid where there had been only air. A week passed, then another. The pressure didn't disappear. It adapted. His father stopped messaging me directly and began sending messages through others, as if distance made them cleaner. A sister forwarded a note from Dad asking for a sit-down. An uncle suggested mediation, his phrasing careful, his concern performative. One message arrived late at night from a number I didn't recognize. "Families talk things out," it read. "Courts don't need to be involved." My hand stilled over the keyboard. Courts. The word had weight, even used as a warning. I saved it. That was the first time I realized they were afraid of something. Not exposure, exactly, but loss of control. The possibility that their version of events wouldn't be the only one that mattered. I reached out to someone I trusted, a friend from work who had once mentioned volunteering with a women's advocacy group. I didn't tell her everything. I didn't need to. I asked a few careful questions about boundaries, about documentation, about options. She didn't gasp. She didn't judge. She gave me names, resources, a calm assurance that what I was doing, preparing without escalating, was smart. Power doesn't like records, she said. It likes confusion. That sentence stayed with me. My fiancé began keeping his own notes, calls from his father at work, comments made in passing, a conversation where his boss pulled him aside and asked if everything was okay at home, an implication wrapped in concern. Someone had been talking. When he told me, his mouth set into a hard line. He's crossing lines now. I nodded. Write it down. We compared notes one evening at the kitchen table, papers spread between us. The light was soft, late, not interrogating. The baby shifted as if aware of the quiet intensity in the room. My fiancé reached across the table and squeezed my hand once, a wordless acknowledgement. A message arrived while we sat there, from his mother. "I'm worried about you," it began. "This stress isn't good for the baby. Your father didn't mean to upset you, but your reaction has created distance." I read it twice, then a third time. It was carefully written. No threats, no overt blame, just concern weaponized into pressure. I saved it. Another message followed minutes later. "We can fix this if you're willing to be reasonable." Reasonable. The word had been following me for years, always appearing when someone wanted me to give up ground. I didn't respond. Days later, his father left a voicemail. He spoke slowly, his voice low and controlled. He talked about family reputation, about how people were starting to ask questions, about how I should consider the consequences of making a scene. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. The implication did the work for him. I saved the voicemail. A small tremor passed through me afterward. Not fear exactly, but recognition. This was not going to resolve itself through patience. I scheduled a consultation with a lawyer recommended by my friend. I told my fiancé I wanted to go alone. He didn't argue. The office was quiet and unremarkable. Beige walls, a desk cleared of clutter. The lawyer listened without interruption, her expression neutral, professional. I handed her the folder, the printed messages, the notes. She didn't rush. When she spoke, her voice was measured. "You're doing the right thing by documenting," she said. "No one can tell you what to tolerate. What matters is pattern." Pattern. The word landed cleanly. "What should I expect?" I asked. "That depends on how far they push," she replied, "and how prepared you are." I left with guidance, not promises, a sense of direction, not certainty. At home, I placed the folder in a drawer that closed with a soft, decisive click. That evening, my fiancé received an email from his father, longer than anything before. It accused him of choosing sides, of abandoning his family, of being manipulated. There was a line about how children deserve stable environments, a thinly veiled question wrapped in concern. My fiancé read it in silence, then forwarded it to me. I added it to the folder. The baby kicked sharply that night, a sudden movement that caught my breath. I pressed my hand to my stomach and waited for the sensation to pass, grounding myself in the rhythm of my breathing. "I'm not doing this to hurt them," I said quietly. "I know," my fiancé replied. "You're doing it to protect us." A message arrived from his sister the next morning, the tone urgent. "Dad's talking about coming over. He's very upset." I looked at the phone, then at the door, then back at the phone. I typed slowly. "Please tell him not to. I'm not available." The reply came quickly. "He doesn't think you get to decide that." I set the phone down. For the rest of the day, every sound from the hallway made my shoulders tense. Footsteps, an elevator bell, a door closing. I stayed calm but alert, my senses tuned to the wrong frequencies. In the late afternoon, there was a knock, not the polite kind, firm, expectant. My heart rate jumped, then steadied. I didn't move. I didn't speak. The knock came again. I stood in the living room, hand resting lightly on the back of the couch, feeling the texture beneath my fingers. My phone lay on the table within reach, screen dark. Outside the door, a voice spoke my name, and I understood with absolute clarity that everything I'd gathered, The messages, the notes, the quiet preparation was about to matter sooner than I'd planned. I didn't open the door right away. I stood there, my back straight, one hand resting lightly against the wall, listening to the sound of his breathing on the other side. It was shallow, impatient, the kind of breath a man takes when he expects compliance, not resistance. He knocked again, harder. "I know you're in there," my father-in-law said. His voice carried through the wood, familiar and suddenly stripped of its dinner table charm. "We need to talk. Now." I didn't answer. The silence stretched. I felt it in my throat first, then my chest, a tightness that wanted to pull me backward into old habits. I stayed where I was. Behind me, my phone vibrated once, then again. My fiancé was on his way home. "I'm not leaving until you come to your senses," my father-in-law continued, his tone shifting into something almost paternal. "This has gone far enough." I stepped closer to the door, close enough that my forehead nearly touched it. "You should go," I said, my voice even. "I've asked you not to come." A pause, then a low chuckle. "You don't get to tell me where I can stand," he replied. "This is family business." "No," I said. "This is harassment." The word landed heavily between us. I heard him inhale sharply. "You're making things worse," he snapped. "All of this, documents, lawyers, whatever game you think you're playing, it won't end the way you think." I reached for my phone and pressed record. "I'm asking you again to leave," I said clearly. "If you don't, I'll call the police." Silence. Then his voice dropped, cold and precise. "You think anyone will believe you? After everything?" My hand trembled once, then steadied. "I'm recording this," I said. The shift was immediate. I could almost hear him rearranging his face, the practiced adjustment of a man used to controlling how things look. "I just want to talk," he said, softer now. "We can fix this." "Leave," I repeated. Another pause. Footsteps shifted, then quietly the sound of him stepping back. "Fine," he muttered, "but don't say I didn't warn you." I waited until his footsteps retreated down the hallway, until the elevator chimed and swallowed him whole. Only then did I release the breath I'd been holding. When my fiancé arrived minutes later, his face was pale, eyes sharp with contained fury. I told him everything. I played the recording. I showed him the saved messages, the notes, the pattern laid bare without commentary. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he nodded once. "We're done letting him set the terms," he said. The next day unfolded faster than I expected. His father didn't retreat. He escalated. Calls came to my fiancé's workplace again, this time not veiled. A message from HR appeared in his inbox, requesting a meeting to discuss concerns raised by a third party. Someone had alleged instability at home, emotional volatility, stress. We sat together at the kitchen table, the morning light pale and unforgiving. My fiancé's hands shook slightly as he read the email. "He's trying to scare us," I said. "He's trying to control us," my fiancé replied. We responded with facts. My fiancé forwarded the documentation we had prepared, messages, voicemails, timelines, attached calmly, professionally. He requested that any further communication go through appropriate channels. The meeting was postponed, then quietly canceled. That afternoon, I received a message from my father-in-law's brother, the one who had texted weeks earlier about courts. "You've embarrassed the family," he wrote. "This is becoming public." I stared at the word public, feeling a strange calm settle over me. "That wasn't my choice," I typed back. "But I'm not hiding anymore." I didn't send anything else. The confrontation came 2 days later at my fiancé's parents' house. His mother had requested a meeting. "With everyone present," she said. "Neutral ground," she called it. "Family resolution." We went. The living room was arranged carefully, chairs placed in a loose circle like a support group no one had agreed to join. Light streamed in through the large front window, bright and unflattering. The air smelled faintly of furniture polish and tension. His father sat across from me, arms crossed, posture rigid. His brothers flanked him. His mother hovered near the couch, wringing her hands. His sisters sat stiffly, eyes darting. I felt the baby shift as we took our seats. I placed my hand over my stomach and breathed. "We're here to clear the air," his mother began, voice trembling slightly. "This has gone too far." I nodded. "I agree." My father-in-law scoffed. "You've made a spectacle of this," he said, "dragging outsiders into family matters." I met his gaze. "You came to my home after I asked you not to," I said. "You threatened me." "I did no such thing," he snapped. I reached into my bag and placed my phone on the coffee table between us. The sound of it touching the glass was sharp in the quiet room. "I recorded it," I said. His eyes flicked to the phone. For the first time since I'd known him, uncertainty cracked his expression. "You wouldn't," his sister murmured. "I did," I replied. My fiancé leaned forward. "We also have the messages," he said calmly, "the emails, the calls to my workplace." His father's face flushed. "This is manipulation," he said, pointing at me. "She's turning you against us." "No," my fiancé said. "You did that yourself." I tapped my phone and played the recording. His voice filled the room, clear, unmistakable. The warning, the doubt cast on my child, the implied threat. Silence followed, heavy and complete. His mother's hand flew to her mouth. One of his brothers shifted uncomfortably. A sister whispered, "Dad." "That's out of context," my father-in-law said quickly. "You provoked me." I reached into my bag again and slid a printed stack of papers onto the table. Messages, dates, highlighted lines. "Context doesn't change pattern," I said. The room seemed to shrink inward. No one spoke. The weight of it pressed down, undeniable. "I asked you to explain a joke," I continued, my voice steady. "You turned my past into a weapon. You questioned my child. When I didn't back down, you escalated." He stared at the papers, jaw tight. "You're destroying this family," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm protecting mine." His mother began to cry softly. "Why didn't you tell me it was this bad?" she asked him. He didn't answer. One of his brothers cleared his throat. "We should take a break," he suggested weakly. My fiancé stood. "No," he said. "This ends today." He turned to his father. "You will not contact us again unless it's through a lawyer. You will not come to our home. You will not speak about my partner or our child." "And if I do?" his father challenged. I met his eyes. "Then this goes further," I said, "and I'm ready." For a moment, no one moved. The only sound was the ticking of a clock on the wall, each second loud and accusatory. His father stood abruptly. "You're choosing her," he said to my fiancé. "Yes," my fiancé replied. "I am." The room fractured then. Raised voices, his mother pleading, a sister crying, an uncle muttering about consequences. I stayed seated, hands folded, my body still. When we left, the sunlight outside felt almost too bright. The door closed behind us with a solid finality that echoed in my chest. That evening, my phone buzzed with a notification, an email, from a legal address I didn't recognize. I opened it and read the first line, my breath catching as I realized exactly how far he was willing to go. The email was brief, stiffly worded, and meant to intimidate. It referenced defamatory statements, family reputation, and potential action. It used legal language like a shield, hoping the shape of the words would be enough to make me retreat. It wasn't. By the time the sun rose the next morning, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Clarity without adrenaline. The fear had burned off. What remained was calm, steady resolve. We responded through our lawyer, one page, factual, documented, polite, firm. The follow-up never came. Days passed, then weeks. The silence that followed wasn't the suffocating kind they'd used before. It was the kind that comes after a door closes and stays closed. My fiancé's workplace received no more calls. The The sideways glances from extended family stopped because the gathering stopped altogether. Some relationships fell away quietly. Others froze in place, suspended by boundaries that no longer bent. His mother reached out once, alone. No demands, no defenses, just an apology that didn't excuse itself. It was tentative, imperfect, but real enough that I accepted it without reopening the door completely. We spoke on neutral ground with limits clearly drawn. She cried. I didn't. That felt like progress. The baby arrived on a gray morning washed in soft rain. The hospital room was dim and calm, the light gentle instead of interrogating. When they placed him in my arms, warm and impossibly small, something inside me finally exhaled. I looked at his face and knew, without doubt, that nothing from my past had the power to stain this moment. Nothing from anyone else's mouth could rewrite what I had built with my own hands. We didn't announce his birth to everyone. We told the people who had shown us through action that they deserved to know. The rest learned later, or not at all. Life didn't become perfect. It became honest. There were quiet evenings on the couch, the baby sleeping against my chest, the room lit by a single lamp. There were mornings where exhaustion clung to my bones and joy slipped in anyway, uninvited and welcome. There were moments when old memories surfaced, glances, words, judgments, but they no longer had teeth. One afternoon, while organizing paperwork, I found the old folder, the messages, the notes, the printed emails. I sat at the kitchen table and flipped through them slowly, my son sleeping nearby in his bassinet, his breathing soft and even. I realized something then. That folder had once represented fear, proof I needed to survive. Now it was just paper. I closed it and slid it into the back of a drawer. Not destroyed, not erased, just no longer central. I didn't need to win anything anymore. I had already claimed what mattered. My body had carried life. My voice had held boundaries. My silence, when chosen, had become strength instead of surrender. If you had told the younger version of me, the one folding laundry above a laundromat, counting dollars, bracing for judgment, that one day she would sit in a quiet kitchen, unafraid, protecting her child with calm authority, she might not have believed you. But here I am. Sometimes, late at night, when the house is still, I think about that old rhythm, the hum of machines, the sound of survival in motion. It doesn't feel like a wound anymore. It feels like proof that I learned how to keep going long before anyone gave me permission. If my story stayed with you, maybe it's because you've had to explain yourself too many times, or because someone tried to turn your past into a leash. If so, know this. The part of you that endured is not something to apologize for. It's something that already knows how to stand.